Welcome to the Johns Hopkins Women's Health Podcast, A Woman's Journey, Insights That Matter. I'm Kelly Gear-Ripken, and I invite you to listen to Johns Hopkins specialists discuss the latest topics in women's health. Now here's your host, Lillie Shockney.
Hi, this is Lillie Shockney from A Woman's Journey at Johns Hopkins, and this is our podcast, Insights That Matter. In this podcast, I am joined by dermatologist Dr. Anna Chien, an associate professor of dermatology, and she is also the medical director of the Johns Hopkins Dermatology program at Howard County. Her clinical interests include skin aging, something that we all worry about, photoprotection, rosacea, and general dermatology. Welcome, Dr. Chien, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Lillie. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're here today to discuss natural light, skin aging, and photoprotection. Dr. Chien, can you explain the different types of light, natural and unnatural, that we as human beings encounter on a daily basis?
I think when we think natural light, we are frequently thinking about sunlight, and sunlight actually is made up of three main types of rays. I think we frequently think about ultraviolet rays or UV light, which really only makes up about 8% of the sunlight. The remaining portions consist of visible light, what we can see, which is about 42% or so. And then finally, we have infrared, or essentially almost heat, that makes up almost 50% of the natural sunlight.
Can you explain what photoprotection is?
Yeah, so photoprotection really encompasses all the different methods that we can use to protect ourselves against sun exposure. I think the most common one that we think of is sunscreen. In addition, we're more and more now talking about this multimodal approach to photoprotection, protection from photons from sunlight. And this would include wearing hats, wearing sunglasses, using sun protective clothing, seeking shades, sort of multiple methods to protect ourselves against sunlight.
It certainly does make sense to use all of the resources that we have and not just limit ourselves to one. What is a safe UV level?
To be honest, Lillie, I don't know, maybe because I'm a dermatologist, if there's ever a true safe UV level. And in fact, we often tell our patients that a lot of our sun exposure is cumulative over time from when we were young. And it's really the day in and day out incidental sun that we're sitting in our cars through window glass, even the small amount of UV that builds up over time and causes skin aging and, of course, skin cancer as well, unfortunately.
I know that people don't always realize that they are getting sun exposure when they are driving, and they're getting more, if they're the driver, they're getting more on the left side than they are on the right side. But over time, if they were to look at their arms side by side, say they're 60 years old, I think then they would go, gee, there is a difference between my left arm and my right arm, even though that car dealer told me that my windows were totally tinted and I would have no problem with sunlight.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't know how often or how many times we see more wrinkles, more sunspots, more skin cancer, even on the left side. May it be the left side of the face, the left arm. And it's true. I think standard tinting in the window glass, it does protect against more of the UVB rays, which causes burns, but it doesn't protect quite as well against the UVA type rays. These actually are longer. They penetrate deeper in the skin and cause a lot of the wrinkles and skin aging changes. So the standard window tinting actually doesn't protect against all of the sunlight.
Sounds like we need to be handing out stickers that say UVA with a circle and a line through them and put them on our t-shirts.
Right, yeah.
What is the difference, if there is one, between sunblock and sunscreen? For years, the term was always sunscreen, and then I'd say over the last maybe 15 to 20 years, when you go into a pharmacy, you'll see that just about everything says sunblock instead.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think oftentimes everyone, including us in our clinics, we tend to use them almost interchangeably. In the strictest sense, a sunblock is more referring to a physical blocker. So these are the type of sunscreens such as zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, in which when you put it on the skin, it's not necessarily absorbed. It almost creates a block in a way to block out the sunlight sunlight, reflects the sunlight away. Sunscreen, on the other sense, is more referring to the chemical sunscreen. So once it's applied on the skin, it's kind of absorbed in the skin. And when the sun hits the skin, it breaks it down. But for all practical purposes, they are used pretty interchangeably.
What about oral photoprotection?
Actually, a new and kind of exciting area. And I suspect this is really where we're going to go in terms of sun protection, because a lot of our current methods, nothing is perfect. It may be sunscreen, sun protective clothing. So thinking ahead, there are many groups looking at oral forms of photoprotection. And I would say nothing is for certain yet, but there are a few products that are being used. For instance, nicotinamide. It's a B vitamin that some dermatologists are using more from a skin cancer prevention standpoint in someone who's had multiple skin cancers or maybe at high risk for skin cancer. And that may be something worthwhile to discuss with your dermatologist, whether someone will be a candidate and what type of dosing. There are also some studies out there looking at various plant extracts. For instance, there's a firm extract called polypodium that's also been shown to have some photoprotective properties. And there are many others out there. And I think this is an exciting area and something that's definitely going to be sort of the future of photoprotection.
Are either of these something that a consumer would buy over the counter, or do they require a prescription? They certainly require a discussion with their doctor. I'm thinking about our audience listening to this, and they might zip over this afternoon to their local pharmacy and start scanning the vitamin B shelf and scoop up anything that says vitamin B and start taking it thinking, oh, good, this is going to solve my problems for the future.
These are actually all available over the counter, but like you were saying exactly, I think there definitely needs to be a conversation or discussion. The vitamin D, nicotinamide, we're currently using it more from a skin cancer prevention standpoint versus skin aging, but many of the others like the polypodium extract, many of these are available over the counter. I think as more data comes out, we'll have more clarity in terms of how they can be used and their safety profile and how effective they are.
Well, that sounds really hopeful. I love to hear that there's new things on the horizon to help us overcome some of these types of troubles. So now let's talk about blue light. Human beings spend a lot of time, and I'm guilty of it myself, in front of computers and other electronic devices, particularly I would say our cell phones, that certain devices do emit what we now know is called blue light. We've already heard that this blue light can disturb sleep patterns. How else is this blue light harmful to us if it is?
Blue light is found within the visible light portion of the sunlight, if you will. And I think for many years, there's been a lot of focus, at least in dermatology, on ultraviolet rays, on UVA, UVB rays, and not so much on visible light till in recent years in which we're looking at this portion of the sunlight. And blue light is a part of that spectrum. And some of the early studies are showing that blue light, at least for the skin, can definitely lead to different types of pigmentation. So may very well explain something as simple as sunspots and freckles that all of us get, to even more some of the pigmentation type disorders that we see in some patients. It's an area of active research, and teams are looking at how does it relate to inflammation? Does it cause skin cancers? Does it cause oxidative stress? Which there's definitely early evidence that that can actually play a role in all of those pathways.
Can you talk a little bit more about oxidative stress? That isn't a term I don't think that our audience will be familiar with.
Oxidative stress actually happens in all of the organs and cells in our body, including the skin. So anytime if there's a stress that happens on the skin, for instance, in this case, we're talking about sun exposure or maybe environmental stresses, our body's natural response is to try to break this down, and in turn causes downstream a lot of inflammation and effects we see in the skin. So some of that could be a result of changes in the skin texture, changes in the skin pigment, to on the other end of the spectrum, it can actually cause cells to change and start to head into the direction of atypical cells or irregular cells, and ultimately skin cancer.
What is the difference between squamous cell and beta cell carcinomas, and also the most deadly form of skin cancer, of course, which is melanoma?
They differ really by where they originate in the skin. So basal cells, actually the most common type of cancer in general, it originates right at the base of the first layer of the skin. So therefore we call them, it's the basal layer. So they're basal cells. Squamous cell, it comes from the first layer of the skin. When they start to grow a little bit more, proliferate, that's what causes squamous cell type skin cancers. And then melanoma comes from melanin or pigment in the skin. So oftentimes these skin cancers may have color or they look like moles. That's what causes melanoma. And you're exactly right. That's the one that we're most concerned about. It has the potential to spread beyond the skin into lymph nodes, organs, and we see it across all age groups, unfortunately, even in some of our younger patients.
What about the use of different light for treatment of skin conditions? One in particular, rosacea.
We talk about light having many negative effects, but actually in dermatology, we also use light in many ways to benefit the skin. And for instance, in rosacea, we commonly will use a laser light. Lasers really, they're targeting different colors in the skin, if you will. So we have lasers that target the brown pigment in the skin, for instance, in freckles and sunspots. And we also have lasers that will target the red in the skin, such as what we see in rosacea, in which patients may have more rosy cheeks, maybe more prominent blood vessels. So this kind of red-seeking laser can target these vessels, help to close them off, and therefore dilute out and erase some of that red, the blood vessels that we tend to see in rosacea patients.
Thank you. Now let's talk about photoprotection skin myths. Do all skin types have to worry about natural light exposure?
Yes. And I think this is something that we are just starting to emphasize and really get the message out there. So sun protection is for everyone. There are some patients, they are a little bit more sensitive in the sun, more prone to burning. But just because someone doesn't suffer from a burn or doesn't tan as readily doesn't mean their skin is not seeing some of the negative effects from sunlight. We know individuals with darker skin type can certainly still have skin aging, changes related to the sun, and even skin cancer. So we always emphasize sun protection, the multimodal photoprotection for everyone.
Are there certain types of skin, though, that naturally are more resilient to visible skin aging?
Individuals with a little bit more personal pigment, just natural personal pigment, in a way, they do have some natural protection. It almost provides a little extra SPF against sunlight, if you will. So there are studies that have shown that in those individuals, some of the signs of skin aging, from wrinkles to brown spots, sunspots, they tend to come up a little bit later on in life because of their natural personal pigment that offers that protection.
Should everyone, regardless of their ethnic background, be adhering to some basic skincare regimen each day?
What we really recommend is in the daytime, using a moisturizer with an SPF. It's almost like brushing your teeth, something you're doing year round. May it be a winter day, may it be a rainy day. You want to use the moisturizer with SPF on areas that are exposed to protect against that incidental sun. And otherwise, just as a foundation, we also always recommend very gentle cleansing products. And then in the evening, using a moisturizer. And if your skin tends to be on the drier side, of course, using moisturizers liberally throughout the day. But that combination of sun protection and then protecting your barrier with gentle skin products and moisturizer really is the foundation of good skincare.
When I think about skincare, and of course, all of us see a lot of advertisements on television, they're oftentimes advertising exfoliants, which are not something that I consider gentle to the skin. Is there an appropriate time that someone would be using an exfoliant versus staying away from an exfoliant?
To be honest, Lily, I think in our field, we don't recommend exfoliants all that often. The skin will naturally turn over on its own every 4 weeks or so. And if anything, we tend to see with the exfoliants causing more irritation or even rash on the skin. So we always tend to focus on just very gentle skincare, protecting the barrier with good moisturizer, protecting the skin from good sun protection. And our skin really doesn't need a lot of anything additional to help it turn over. It'll naturally do that.
Okay. Tell me your thoughts on retinol, which is very popular today and something that doesn't require a prescription as it did, say, 20 years ago.
Retinol, is really still the foundation for us. We use it to treat acne, but certainly it has a big role from a skin aging prevention and treating some of the signs of skin aging. And with all the products out there and so many different claims, I think retinol probably still has the best data backing its ability to improve skin aging. So we know there's data that shows that it can help smooth out fine lines. And it does that by building up the collagen in our skin to erase some of the fine lines. And then it also helps to break up some of the pigment on the skin. So helping with the faint sunspots, the freckles. Usually we recommend using it in the evening since the sun can actually break down some of the retinol ingredients. And you're right, there are many options now available over the counter. It's a good place to start because the medicine can cause a little bit of irritation and dryness. So I would start with over the counter, use it cautiously, you can use it with moisturizers. And then if someone's tolerating that, okay, there are definitely many prescription versions as well that they can kind of step up the treatment.
Got it. So what should we as consumers look out for when buying skin products for light exposure?
Some of the key components to look for sun protection. So we always recommend something broad spectrum, meaning it will protect both against UVA and UVB type rays. For day-to-day, an SPF of 30 would be sufficient. That could be in a moisturizer or alone as a sunscreen or sunblock to just use to protect against incidental sun. And if someone is outdoors for long periods of time at the beach or out in their yard, then they want to go up to at least a 60. And then reapply is probably the biggest challenge. Every few hours, reapplying that product.
Do you give different advice depending on where people live geographically, say out in Arizona versus Alaska or Boston?
Definitely depending on the intensity of the light and also depends on time of year in terms of the temperature. And at baseline, if someone's able to manage sort of that using multiple methods, may it be sunscreen coupled with the hats, the sun protective clothing. And then for those who are in warmer climates, if they are outdoors more, may it be through sweat or their activity in which a sunscreen might rub off, we might recommend reapplying more or relying more on clothing, hats, and other photoprotective methods.
And there are today clothing that you can buy that literally does offer that type of protection. That's something that I know I purchased early on for my grandchildren when they were little and continue to buy it for them so that at least I know that their chest, their back, their arms are safer than they were if they're just going to be out there in their bathing suits in the water. Are there advantages and disadvantages to natural and mineral skincare products versus others made with various chemicals?
This has been an area of great interest in recent years. So when we think of sun protection, we always think of our natural sunscreens were more physical blockers, if you will. So these were what I mentioned previously, the zinc oxide and the titanium dioxide. So these are the physical blockers that create almost a film on the skin that reflects the rays. On the flip side, then there's the discussion regarding the chemical sunscreens. So there's a whole slew of them, which are they essentially, when they're applied, they're absorbed in the skin and they kind of break down the sun once the sun hits the skin. And I think these days there's a little bit more push to use the physical blockers, the ones that's more crazed to film. I mean, for one, the chemical blockers, we tend to see some allergic reactions with them in certain individuals. So if someone tends to react to sunscreen products or has sensitivity, the physical blockers would be a little bit more ideal. There's also been a few reports regarding questions on the absorption of chemical sunscreens, how much of it gets into the blood. I think more research is still needed in that area, but I think if there's any concern, I always tell my patients, you can stick with more of the physical blockers, combine that with the other photoprotective methods.
That makes sense. How much can we really fight against aging? When I see these commercials on television, they're always choosing movie stars that have gorgeous skin. I mean, their skin looks like they're 15 years old.
Yeah. Or they've been properly photoshopped or...
Exactly. They've been airbrushed and heaven knows what else, which I worry gives consumers the expectation that they can reverse the aging of their skin by purchasing whatever product it is that is being sold. And in most cases, many of these products are not inexpensive. So it's, in some cases, it's an investment. And I think, too, that women might be thinking, well, the more expensive it is, the better it will be for me.
You bring up many great points that come up in our clinic visits quite often. And, all of our skin, it will go through skin aging due to sun exposure, environmental exposure, but all of us, our skin will also just naturally age with time, regardless of any exposure. I think there are many things we can do to protect our skin. And we always talk about skin health and focus on the health of the skin versus some of the aging changes, because they'll many ways directly translate. And oftentimes preventative measures tend to work better than after the fact. So even sometimes when I see some of the teenagers, younger patients, we're always starting to talk about photoprotection. We're talking about protecting the skin barrier. I always like to say good skincare doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be multi-steps and doesn't need to be expensive. There are actually many great products in our local drugstore that can really promote skin health and take care of the skin. I think it's true. There are many claims out there, and some of these products can get quite pricey, and it's hard to know what's the data behind it, whether they really will help the skin.
They don't come with a medical journal translated into layman's terms attached to that bottle that says, here's the real evidence-based research, and this will help you to decide. So we know that people do think about sunburning in the summertime, but I don't think it's really on anybody's radar for the other seasons. I don't think that people really do think about sun exposure like in the winter or even in the spring and the fall for that matter. Can you talk a little bit about the various seasons and to what degree should everyone be paying attention to their, what I'm going to call skin health?
Photoprotection, it should be year round. And that's what we're really trying to emphasize to our patients. We see their sun exposure, even in the height of winter, even on a cloudy day. I know sometimes when it's cold and rainy, it's hard to think of sun protection, but it really should be year round. And we try to make it as a parallel to when we would brush our teeth on a daily basis, something we do every single day. Similarly with sun protection, getting that habit where we're always having even moisturizer with an SPF to protect against the incidental sun. It should be something that's done on a daily basis, regardless of the season.
Something we haven't talked about that I think is worthy of discussion too are tanning beds. They're still out there. When I go to the grocery store, I drive by two of them and it makes me crazy because I worry about who is in there doing very unsafe things to themselves because they believe that tan skin is more attractive looking than their natural healthy skin.
Well, I think you and me both, Fred, about the tanning beds. And sure, I think in recent years, more regulation has been put in, but you're right, they're definitely still out there and they tend to target certain population. The concern with tanning beds is there are multiple studies and data that's shown that it can be associated with melanoma, the deadly form of skin cancer. So definitely something we recommend strongly against. I know our academies put out messages regarding avoiding tanning beds completely. If somebody really wants to achieve a little bit of color on their skin and tan, if needed, sometimes we'll talk about using like self-tanners, but sometimes we always say, healthy skin, your natural skin is the most beautiful. Tanning, I mean, it look beautiful now, but actually I think one of my professors like to say, it's kind of a sign your skin is crying for help. That tan is a result of damage that's being done on the skin that's giving it that color. So
I like that. Oh, I like that very much. At the beginning of our discussion, you mentioned about accumulative sun exposure. And one of the things I'd like us to touch on is the fact that many of our listeners do have children and grandchildren, and some of them even have great-grandchildren. We want to start when kids are really young in keeping their skin healthy rather than trying to fix it later. So something that I've been telling my friends as they prepare to have a new grandchild come into this world, when they're making their baby basket for the baby shower, how about sticking in some sunblock for toddlers, just as a little reminder to that new mommy that we need to start taking care of skin that's very tender, quite frankly. I mean, talk about the most fragile of skin in little ones. When I went to a festival pre-pandemic, I felt so compelled. I did what my mother would have done. I felt like my mother that day. A woman was carrying a baby that was just wearing a diaper. It was very hot, and the child's face and chest were blood red. And I just walked right over it. My husband was saying, don't do that, don't do that. It's too late. And I said, sweetie, I know how much you love this little guy. He is getting sunburn, which could result in him getting something really serious later on, a serious form of skin cancer. And she said, oh, I hadn't even noticed. We've only been out here about a half an hour. So I thought, wow, half an hour to me was forever having a baby's skin exposed. So are there things that we can do and educate people who do have youngsters about the importance of skin health very early on and maintaining it rather than trying to fix it later on? You mentioned getting up every morning and brushing your teeth is a routine. If we could encourage mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers to do the same regarding their own skin health, but in this case, I'm talking about children, that I think that we may have the opportunity to turn this around with the next generation that's coming into this world right now. Are there particular types of sunblock that are safe for youngsters versus adult skin? Or are all of them about the same for what the ingredients are that are in them?
We do tailor sun protection a little bit differently for younger patients or younger kids. And you're absolutely right. I think starting early, getting them into the habit, because this will be lifelong in terms of their photoprotection. So the recommendation is when they're younger than 6 months to rely primarily on maybe sun avoidance or using kind of more the clothing, the hats to protect against sunlight. Starting at 6 months and older, we can use a little bit of sunblock. Usually we're recommending more the physical blockers. So the ones that have a little bit lower allergic potential, we don't see irritation quite as much. And same thing, we continue to emphasize you can couple that with protective clothing, hats, like the ones you purchase for your grandchildren, if they're outdoors. I think those work really well. And it's true, a lot of the sun exposure really is cumulative. And for instance, the basal cell type skin cancer, the squamous cell, we know that's more due to just lifelong accumulated sun exposure, whereas melanoma can be more related to a period of intense sun. It could be a blistering sunburn or just some short episode that caused a sunburn. That more relates to melanoma. So we want to protect against both, kind of incidental and then some of the certainly sunburns and blistering sunburns.
And when people are in the water swimming or just relaxing, with that water reflection of the sun. I think when people are in water, the water's cool, they feel good, they're not sweating, so they kind of forget about the fact that they are still getting sun exposure, and in some cases even more intense as that water's reflecting that sun for sure. Can you get skin cancer in parts of your body that actually don't get exposed to sunlight? My husband's had melanoma 3 times, and I check his skin every month, and I always am looking at the bottom of his feet and between his toes, which he thinks is very strange. But I tell him, believe it or not, you could get a melanoma in here. And he'll say, I don't ever remember laying on the beach and fanning out my toes to get tanned between my toes. But am I not correct that you actually can get, for example, melanoma in areas that have not been exposed necessarily to intense sunlight?
You definitely can. I mean, we know sun is a big contributor for many of the skin cancers, but there are many other factors, be environmental exposures and certainly genetics play a big role. And we definitely can see skin cancers, including melanoma, in some protected areas. And I'm glad you're checking his feet, because oftentimes I think many of us, we don't look at our feet quite as much. And so actually when we do find skin cancer and melanoma on the feet and between the toes, they tend to be a lot more advanced, a lot thicker and more aggressive. So yeah, definitely we can see skin cancer not only in sun-exposed areas.
Thank you. I have the privilege of being able to see your gorgeous face, whereas our audience cannot. But I do want our audience to know that Dr. Chien's skin is gorgeous. So she certainly is practicing what she is preaching. Dr. Chien, thank you so very much for this important information today and for being part of our monthly Insights That Matter podcast series. And I hope everyone out there is watchful for their skin so you can look as gorgeous as the good Lord intended. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to A Woman's Journey podcast. Join me, Kelly Gear-Ripken, your host, Lillie Shockney, and a variety of Johns Hopkins experts on the first Thursday of each month to learn about medical advances in women's health. A Woman's Journey is grateful for the unrestricted educational grants from HRH Foundation that supports our podcast series, Insights That Matter. For more information about A Woman's Journey's virtual programs occurring throughout the year and our monthly webcasts and podcasts, visit our website, hopkinsmedicine.org/awomansjourney. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, and visit our website at hopkinsmedicine.org/awomansjourney. Until next time, stay well.